Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about the team that I think is the biggest sleeping giant in college football. And before you try and say anything, these are my reasons. This team is located in a very football heavy area. This team has very good facilities and a good culture. And finally, they're one of the best teams in their respective area of college football. And this team is the Tulane Green Wave. In this video, I'm going to be going through their team history and why I believe that they could one day be a championship contender. Little did you know, Tulane was one of the founding members of the SEC, and they were a part of the SEC for almost 30 years. In the early 1960s, they decided to leave the SEC because of their higher academic standards and the fact that they weren't able to compete with their schools due to them having many more limitations due to their academics. The Magnolia Conference would have likely included teams such as Tulane, Tulsa, Wake Forest, Vanderbilt, SMU, Rice, Duke, Georgia Tech, Emory University, and Sewanee. This would have been very different to the landscape of college football because many of these teams would end up being pretty good, including SMU in the 1980s. Tulane would end up joining Conference USA in the 1960s, and they would stay in the Conference USA until the early 2010s when they would join the American Conference. One important year that I skipped over was the 1998 season, where they went undefeated, and for the longest time it was considered the peak of Tulane football. Likely due to the fact that Tulane had been mostly irrelevant throughout the entirety of their program's history outside of starting the Southern Ivies and being in the SEC. They had essentially not done anything. Up until they hired head coach Willie Fritz. Willie Fritz was a very good head coach who helped revitalize the program and their athletic standards that they once had precedent. He spent a few years pretty much doing nothing until 2022 he had a breakout year. In 2021 they went 2-10 with the entire highlight of the season being a 35-40 loss to Oklahoma, where they had a 4th and 6, but their franchise quarterback, Michael Pratt, rolled out and ended up getting half a yard short. In 2022, however, they would start off 2-0 before losing to ex-rival Southern Miss in one of their old Conference USA rivalries. They would be very strong throughout the remainder of the season. They would end up finishing 12-2, while winning the American, and their one other loss being to UCF. This was the last year the American Conference would have many perennial powers such as Cincinnati and Houston, so it was Tulane's last chance to fully assert themselves. Their final game, or regular season game, came against Cincinnati on the road, which was considered to be a very tough matchup. They ended up winning that game on 4th and 7 when the sun itself, frankly, made one of Cincinnati's receivers drop a pass. That game would end up helping them host the American Conference game. They were already in it, win or loss, but they would have hosted, or they would have had to go on the road instead if they had lost. They ended up drubbling UCF at home in the American Conference Championship to complete one of the best turnarounds in college football history. They would have one more game against USC, and in the fourth quarter, they would find themselves down 15. It would take a huge comeback to come back from this, but after a touchdown and a USC muffed kickoff to set themselves up inside the 1, Tulane would get a safety and then go on a long 3-minute drive capped off by Alex Bowman's reviewed catch, where he would end up sealing the touchdown to give Tulane the tie, and the extra point would help them win. That was the biggest win in Tulane football history, and they would carry that momentum into 2023, where they would sadly lose the American Conference to SMU at home, but SMU ended up winning the ACC the next season, so it didn't look as bad. In 2024, they would lose the American Conference Championship to a once-in-a-lifetime good Army team who somehow learned how to pass. In 2025, they had likely their best season since 2022, as they would play very well throughout the regular season, win the American against North Texas, and get drubbed by Ole Miss in the playoffs. However, it was a major stepping stool throughout the program, as they knew that at least they had the capabilities to make the playoffs. One crucial part I forgot to mention was just before the 2024 season, Tulane head coach Willie Fritz would leave to go to Houston, and they would promptly hire John Sumrall as their head coach. John Sumrall at the end of the 2025 season left for Florida, sadly. However, Tulane hired a new guy. I'm not exactly sure of his name, but he has high expectations for Tulane now. So why is Tulane a sleeping giant? Well, for starters, they're in New Orleans, which already is going to attract plenty of recruits who want to be in kind of a party city at a party school. They're also in a pretty good hotbed of recruiting with Louisiana, Texas, I guess Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, all of that. And they're just kind of in the middle, so they're kind of just in the middle of all the southern states recruiting, which really helps them. Also, players nowadays don't care as much about program history as they do recent success. And I guarantee you, Tulane making the playoffs and them just being on TV definitely helps their odds of recruits seeing them and wanting to go there. Also, with Tulane being a private school, they have a lot of rich alumni who would more than likely be willing to spend money to help their alma mater become better at football. That is definitely a driving factor, as you can see with Texas Tech last season. They had an oil billionaire invest almost $50 million and they made the playoffs. Granted, they did really bad in the playoffs. You still have a chance. Everyone who makes the playoffs has a chance to win the national championship. Also, out of pretty much every team in the group of 5, Tulane is the most likely to get bumped up. The only one, or the only two that you could say even have a chance of getting moved up before them is Boise State and Memphis. Boise State probably won't because I don't really think they want to, and they're also in Idaho. What conference do you join in Idaho? I guess maybe the ACCs because, you're pretty close to the Atlantic coast. But Tulane, Memphis, and Boise State are probably the only ones that will get moved up. I think Tulane is probably the most likely. They will probably end up in the Big 12 if I were to assume. No guarantees, but if I were to pick, it'd probably be there in the Big 12, automatic conference bid to the playoffs. When that happens, crazy things can happen to a football program. Anyways, that is the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Who knows, maybe Tulane will win a national championship in my lifetime. Probably not. I'm not much of a Tulane fan, but I'd like to see them win one. Anyways, like, subscribe.